So when you tap an app on your smartphone, you expect it to just open.
Right, it's automatic.
Exactly. It's this binary transaction. You issue a command, the underlying source code executes it, and the software delivers this rigid, totally predictable result.
Yeah, ideally anyway.
Right. And if the code has a bug, the developers just, they push a software patch overnight. You wake up and you have a seamlessly functioning device. But, and this is what we're getting into today, imagine if the source code running your privacy, your rights, and your workplace regulations was actually written in 1789.
Which is kind of a terrifying thought when you really frame it that way.
It really is. Because when that code encounters a brand new reality like, say, the invention of the internet or even commercial aviation, we can't just push an overnight software update.
No, we definitely cannot.
Instead, we have to ask this panel of judges to essentially translate 18th century English. Just figure out if, your digital data is protected.
Which is an incredibly tall order, for anyone. We desperately want our foundational legal text to act like that perfectly calibrated machine you mentioned, but we were dealing with a historic document that fundamentally requires constant, highly contested human interpretation.
Absolutely. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive created just for you. Today, we have a really fascinating stack of sources to explore.
We really do. Some great stuff in here.
Yeah. So we're looking at the actual transcription of the U.S. Constitution from the National Archives, plus some crucial historical context from Ben's Guide and Simple Wikipedia. We also have this eye-opening article from a University of Georgia law professor titled 15 Curious Facts About the Federalist Papers. And to top it off, a really rigorous legal theory paper from Georgetown Law called Originalism versus Living Constitutionalism.
It is a phenomenal stack of information, and it's perfectly suited for understanding, not just the history of the American Republic, but the active, everyday mechanics of how the government is actually allowed to operate in your life right now.
Yes, right now, today. So our mission today is to explore the origin of this ultimate American rulebook, uncover the frantic, historically misunderstood PR campaign to sell it to the public, and then decode the fierce modern war over how to actually interpret its words today.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even touch the modern battle over interpreting the Constitution, we have to look at the immense pressure under which it was actually adopted. The popular myth is that the founders just, calmly sat down by candlelight and wrote a masterpiece.
Oh, yeah, the whole demigods gathering in a room narrative.
Exactly. But the reality is they were acting out of sheer desperation.
Desperation is the exact word for it. The newly independent states were functioning under the Articles of Confederation, and that system was actively collapsing.
Right. Just wasn't working.
Not at all. The federal government was so weak, it couldn't even collect taxes. It couldn't regulate trade barriers that the states were aggressively setting up against each other.
Oh, wow. So they were taxing each other.
Yeah, the states were essentially acting like bickering independent countries. It was a mess.
So delegates rushed to Philadelphia, and they drafted this entirely new constitution to centralize power. But the local voters, who, remember, had literally just fought a bloody war to escape a powerful British king, they were deeply skeptical of handing over control to a new, powerful central government.
Makes total sense when you think about it.
It does, and that deep suspicion explains exactly why the Constitution faced this massive uphill battle just to get ratified. And that uphill battle leads directly into, well, one of the most famous public relations campaigns in human history, the Federalist Papers.
Right. And most people know the Federalist Papers as this majestic, incredibly cohesive philosophical treatise, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay under the pen name Publius.
The famous Publius.
Exactly. But diving into that University of Georgia law article reveals a production process that was wonderfully chaotic.
I was actually blown away by the messy reality of this when I read it. We always hear about the 85 essays, but the authors actually only wrote 84.
Yeah, that's such a great detail.
Right. A publisher literally just split one of the really long ones, essay number 31 and a half, just to make it fit better in a bound book.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And the division of labor behind those essays was even more erratic. So John Jay's contribution was cut violently short almost immediately.
Oh, this part is wild.
Yeah. After writing just a few of the early essays, he fell seriously ill. And then in April of 1788, before he could fully return to the project, he was caught up in a street riot in New York.
A literal street riot?
A literal riot.
Yeah.
And he was hit in the head with a brick.
Wait, a brick?
Yes. According to his wife's letters, the blow was so severe it left 2 large holes in his forehead.
That sounds absolutely horrifying. I mean, ouch.
Yeah, so he is medically incapacitated, which means Hamilton and Madison are left carrying the entire weight of selling this new government to the public all by themselves.
And Hamilton ended up writing 51 of the essays entirely on the side, while simultaneously running a full-time law practice, which is just insane.
It really is. Madison later wrote about the breakneck pace they were forced to maintain. He noted that sometimes they were drafting the philosophical essays while the printer was actively setting the type for the previous pages in the other room.
No way. So the printer's just tapping his foot, waiting for the pages.
Basically, yeah. It shatters the illusion of these men casually philosophizing by candlelight. They were scrambling to meet newspaper publication deadlines.
It sounds exactly like a rushed, caffeine-fueled late-night cram session for a massive group project. They were just churning text out.
Exactly like a group project.
And to make it even more like a messy group project, they secretly disputed who wrote 15 of the essays.
Oh, right, the disputed authorship.
Yeah. For decades after the fact, Hamilton and Madison both claimed to be the true author of specific entries, like essays number 62 and 63.
Which is funny because modern computer-based linguistics, where they analyze specific word frequencies and syntax choices, actually leans heavily toward Madison for those disputed texts.
Oh, really? Madison gets the credit?
Yeah, the data points to Madison. But the sheer chaos of the production remains undeniable.
Wait, hold on, though. If Madison and Hamilton are literally writing these essays while the printer is waiting and they're just dropping them into local New York newspapers, did anyone actually care? Like, did this rushed editorial campaign actually convince the skeptical public to adopt the Constitution?
That is the greatest, most overlooked irony of the Federalist Papers. Despite its modern reputation as the ultimate authoritative guide to the American government, it failed miserably in its primary mission.
Wow. Failed miserably.
Totally. The essays were not widely circulated across all the states. They were specifically targeted at swaying New York voters to elect pro-Constitution delegates to their state ratification convention.
Okay, and how did that local vote actually go?
The voters overwhelmingly rejected the essay's arguments. New York elected anti-federalist delegates by a massive margin. The final count was 46 anti-federalists to just 19 federalists.
46 to 19. That's a landslide against them.
It really was. John P. Kaminsky, who is a leading historian cited in the sources, he points out that the impact of the papers on New York's reception of the Constitution was, well, negligible.
So Publius lost. The voters read these brilliant essays and essentially said, no thanks, we still don't trust a central government.
Exactly. Their modern canonical status, the fact that the Supreme Court constantly cites them today to understand the framers' intent, that was entirely unforeseen by Hamilton and Madison. They were just trying to win a local PR battle, and they lost.
That is incredible. So even though the PR campaign failed to sway those local voters, the Constitution did eventually secure enough states to become the supreme law of the land. But that deep public suspicion of central power that caused the Federalist Papers to fail also explains why the actual text of the Constitution is written the way it is.
Yeah, the text itself reflects that tension.
Definitely. When you look at the transcription from the National Archives, it is shockingly brief.
It's roughly 4,000 words without the later amendments.
That's it, 4,000 words.
Yeah. That is incredibly short for a document designed to govern a massive, complex nation.
It really is. It contains a preamble, 7 articles, and the Bill of Rights, which, by the way, features another great historical irony. The Federalist Papers originally argued vehemently against including a Bill of Rights.
Right. They claimed it was unnecessary and even dangerous.
Yeah, but all 3 authors later had to agree to support it just to appease the massive public pushback and secure final ratification.
Yeah.
But when you read the actual text they settled on, it is this wild, contradictory mix of highly specific rules and incredibly vague promises.
The contrast really is jarring. You have what legal scholars call hardwired rules.
Like what?
Well, Article 1 states that House representatives must be exactly 25 years old. Article 2 requires the president to be exactly 35. Those are bright-line, mathematically precise boundaries. There's no interpreting 35.
Right, you're either 35 or you aren't. But then, right next to those clear rules, you have these incredibly broad, sweeping phrases. Congress has the power to provide for the general welfare. The Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches.
Right. Highly subjective terms.
Yeah. Was it left vague on purpose? because general welfare sounds practically like a blank check. I mean, how does a phrase that broad dictate whether the government can read a listener's text messages today?
What's fascinating here is how legal theorists analyze that exact ambiguity. The Georgetown Law paper introduces a critical concept called underdeterminacy.
Underdeterminacy. Okay, what does that mean?
When the framers used open-textured language, like unreasonable searches, they were establishing outer boundaries that rule out certain extreme abuses, but they deliberately did not provide a final, highly specific answer for every possible future scenario.
So they sort of sketched an outline.
Exactly. The literal text simply runs out.
So the text gets you part of the way there, but leaves a massive gap.
And that gap creates what the Georgetown paper calls a construction zone.
A construction zone. I like that visual.
It's a great term. It's a conceptual space where the literal words of the Constitution are just not enough to resolve a modern dispute. Judges cannot just engage in direct interpretation of the words. They have to engage in constitutional construction to figure out how to give that vague text actual legal effect in the real world.
And these construction zones lead us directly into the ultimate modern legal battleground. Because if there are blanks to fill in regarding, say, your digital privacy or your workplace safety, the biggest war in the legal world right now is over how judges should be allowed to fill them.
Right, the battle over method.
Which brings us to the first major interpretive theory covered in the Georgetown paper, Originalism.
Now, originalism is often deeply misunderstood in popular culture. It is not the older, outdated approach called intentionalism, which basically asked, what would James Madison secretly want us to do?
Right, it's not trying to read the founders' minds.
Exactly. Today, the dominant academic theory is public meaning originalism.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that, because the Georgetown paper is very specific about the two main pillars holding this theory up. First, you have the fixation thesis.
The fixation thesis, yeah.
This is the idea that the meaning of the constitutional text was permanently locked in at the exact moment it was ratified and made public. A word means today exactly what it meant to an ordinary citizen reading a newspaper in 1789.
Right, the meaning is fixed in time.
And then second, you have the constraint principle. This rule dictates that this specific fixed 18th century meaning must legally bind judges today. They cannot alter the meaning just because society has evolved.
And to figure out that locked-in meaning, originalists do not just guess.
How do they do it?
They use historical dictionaries, they study 18th century diaries, and they use corpus linguistics.
Corpus linguistics.
Yeah, which is essentially scanning massive databases of historical texts to pinpoint exactly how a merchant or a farmer in 1789 would have understood a phrase like freedom of speech.
Wow. So the focus is entirely on the public's understanding of the words, not the author's secret intentions. But, in modern public discourse, the word originalism has become a massive political battleground all its own. People argue endlessly over what the label even means.
They do. And the Georgetown paper describes this arguing over labels as metalinguistic negotiation.
Metalinguistic negotiation.
Wow.
That sounds like heavy academic jargon.
It does, but we actually do it all the time in everyday life.
Yeah, think about the famous racehorse secretariat.
Oh, this is a great analogy.
Right. If a sports network puts secretariat on a list of the top 100 greatest athletes of all time, fans will argue for days.
Oh, absolutely.
But no one is arguing about the underlying facts, like we all agree the horse was incredibly fast and won the Triple Crown. What we are actually fighting over is the boundary of the word athlete.
Right. Should an animal be considered an athlete?
Exactly. Should the label athlete be allowed to include non-humans? That is metalinguistic negotiation. We are fighting to control the definition of a powerful label.
And we see the exact same turf war happening with the word originalism.
For sure. Because in political rhetoric, originalism is often painted purely as a right-wing ideology. Critics will frequently claim that if a judge's ruling doesn't lead to a conservative outcome, they aren't practicing true originalism.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be incredibly clear for you listening right now. We are absolutely not taking political sides here. We are strictly looking at how the Georgetown source analyzes the underlying legal mechanics.
Right. Purely academic.
So, academically speaking, is the mechanism of originalism inherently conservative?
According to the legal scholars at Georgetown, no. Originalism is not what they call a thick ideological concept.
Meaning it's neutral.
Yes. In its pure academic form, it is ideologically neutral. In fact, strictly applying the fixed public meanings of the 19th century can lead to highly progressive outcomes today.
That's fascinating.
The source provides a brilliant mechanical example regarding the 14th Amendment and women's rights.
Oh, yes. They highlight the Bradwell v. Illinois case from 1873. So, Myra Bradwell was an incredibly qualified woman who was denied the right to practice law by the state purely because of her gender.
And at the time, the Supreme Court upheld that sexist exclusion.
Which is terrible.
It is, but if you apply modern public meaning originalism to that exact same case today, the outcome completely flips.
How so?
You look at the 14th Amendment's Privileges or Immunities Clause, which was a section drafted in 1868, essentially designed to protect the basic civil rights of everyday citizens against state overreach.
Okay, so if you scan those historical dictionaries and newspapers we talked about, what did privileges or immunities actually mean to the public back then?
The historical evidence shows the original public meaning of that text broadly protected the right of a citizen to pursue a lawful occupation.
Wait, regardless of the personal, deeply sexist beliefs of the male politicians who drafted it.
Exactly, because you have to separate the text from the men who wrote it. The specific words they ratified meant you could freely pursue a career. So an originalist today could argue that the sexist 1873 ruling should be completely struck down.
Wow.
And not because of modern feminist values, but strictly because the original 1868 public meaning of the text guaranteed economic liberty to all citizens. The fixed, locked-in meaning produces a progressive result because it isn't bound by the false factual beliefs of the 19th century.
That completely flips the popular narrative on its head.
It really does.
But even if originalism isn't always politically conservative, it still demands strict obedience to a fixed rulebook from a radically different era. So what happens if that strictly fixed rulebook from 1789 structurally struggles to handle massive modern realities?
That is the big question.
Right, because the framers couldn't comprehend global supply chains, automatic weapons, or the digital data you produce every time you use your phone. If you reject the idea that we are constrained by a fixed 18th century meaning, you enter the realm of the counter-movement living constitutionalism.
This movement emerged precisely because scholars recognized the danger of a rigid system. The idea of a living constitution really gained academic momentum in the 1920s and 30s.
Okay, who was pushing this?
A prominent scholar named Howard Lee McBain wrote a book in 1927 that really popularized the concept. The core mechanical argument is that the Constitution must be treated as a dynamic entity. If it does not actively adapt to move in the same direction and at the same rate as the society it governs, it will eventually atrophy and fail.
So it views the law less like rigid software code and more like, a biological organism that has to adapt to its environment.
That's a great way to put it.
And the Georgetown paper breaks down how living constitutionalism takes several different mechanical forms. You have common law constitutionalism, which is championed by thinkers like David Strauss.
Right.
This theory says we shouldn't obsess over the 1789 text. Instead, we build constitutional law slowly, case by case, precedent by precedent, just like the old British common law system.
Yeah, building on past decisions. There is also a variation called Thayerian deference, named after legal theorist James Bradley Thayer.
Thayerian deference. What's that one?
This approach argues that unelected judges shouldn't be the ones constantly striking down laws. Instead, courts should generally defer to the democratic will of Congress.
So let the elected officials decide.
Right. The logic is that elected representatives are better suited to adapt the law to modern needs than a panel of judges. The unifying thread across all these living theories is the belief that constitutional practice can, and absolutely must, change in response to changing cultural values.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the Georgetown paper reveals this isn't just a binary war. It isn't just Team Originalism screaming at Team Living Constitutionalism across a battlefield.
No, not at all.
There is a whole world of hybrid theories operating in the middle ground. For instance, Yale professor Jack Balkin's theory of living originalism.
Balkin's theory is a fascinating attempt to synthesize the two opposing camps.
How does he do that?
Well, he actually accepts the core originalist premise. He agrees that judges are bound by the original public meaning of the text, but his mechanical twist is that he argues the original meaning is actually incredibly thin.
He looks at that construction zone we talked about earlier and says, look how huge this zone is.
Exactly. Because the founders deliberately chose to use broad, general principles, Balkin argues the text was actually designed to be a skeletal framework. It leaves massive legitimate room for future generations to flesh out the details.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
He uses this thin framework to square things like the massive expansion of the federal government during the New Deal with originalism. He argues the 18th century text was built to accommodate that kind of modern structural change.
Wow. But if we want to talk about synthesizing these ideas, the Georgetown paper outlines another hybrid concept that I find deeply compelling. It's called constitutional compromise.
Oh, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, constitutional compromise tackles a massive practical problem in legal theory.
Which is?
How do you maintain the stability of the rule of law without overturning decades of settled human rights just to strictly follow an 18th century dictionary?
Right. Think about the monumental Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education, which outlawed school segregation.
Brown v. Board is what legal scholars call a canonical case. It is deeply cemented into the moral fabric of American law and supported by an overwhelming consensus of public opinion.
Yeah.
However, a strict, uncompromising originalist faces a historical dilemma with this case. The 39th Congress that drafted the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause in the 1860s actually maintained segregated schools in Washington, D.C.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So a rigid historical reading might suggest the original public meaning did not mandate integrated schools.
Which is a terrifying thought for modern civil rights.
It is. Under a constitutional compromise theory, you avoid detonating the legal system. You simply accept that canonical cases like Brown are deeply settled law. You grandfather them in to preserve democratic legitimacy and societal stability.
Okay, see.
But you agree to use strict originalism for all novel future questions that arise.
It's basically a peace treaty. It says we aren't going to roll back a century of hard-won human rights, just prove an academic point about history, but we are going to strictly follow the historical rules going forward.
A peace treaty is exactly what it is. It's an attempt to find functional peace in this endless interpretative war.
That's brilliant.
The mere existence of these complex hybrid theories proves that the Constitution is not a simple plug-and-play machine. It is a highly sensitive ecosystem that requires careful, continuous, and often heavily debated human tending.
So what does this all mean for you? Why does a dense academic debate over 18th century dictionaries, corpus linguistics, and metalinguistic negotiation actually matter as you go about your day?
Because it affects everything.
It really does. Because whether a judge sitting on a federal bench decides to use originalism or living constitutionalism dictates exactly how the government is allowed to regulate your life. Think about your daily routine. When you send an encrypted message on your smartphone, does the Fourth Amendment protect your digital privacy from government algorithms?
Great question.
When you walk into your office, does the Commerce Clause give the federal government the authority to ensure your workplace is physically safe?
Every single modern right you have, every physical and digital protection you rely on, filters directly through this exact academic debate.
It really is the filter.
The mechanism by which your freedoms are guaranteed depends entirely on whether the judge reading the Constitution believes they are strictly bound by the public meaning of 1789, or if they believe the text must adapt to the complex realities of 2026.
We started this deep dive by comparing the Constitution to source code. We naturally want the code of our country to be clean, to execute perfectly without bugs. But the source code of the United States isn't binary code. It is written in English, which leaves us with a final, slight unsettling thought to mull over.
And that is?
Well, the English language is a living, breathing thing. It evolves constantly.
Oh, for sure. Words naturally shift in meaning, grammar transforms, and syntax adapts to new generations.
Right. So if the survival of our fundamental rights depends so heavily on uncovering the original public meaning of words written in 1789, what happens as the English language continues to dramatically evolve over the next 200, 300, or 400 years?
That is a wild thing to think about.
Will there come a point in the distant future where the English of the Constitution effectively becomes a dead language? Will American citizens eventually require literal translators just to read the source code of their own basic human rights?
This raises an important question about the ultimate longevity of any written constitution. At what point does an unwavering fidelity to the language of the past sever our connection to the realities of the present?
Exactly. A completely binary software system cannot handle a rapidly changing environment without an update. Eventually, the operating system either gets a massive rewrite or it crashes. Something to think about the next time you read the news.